Namato Ratana Tayasa. May I pay homage to Triple Zim, the Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha. My respect goes to my parents and to my teachers. Hello, good evening, everyone. So today is Saturday, 31st of October 2020, and today is also Halloween day. Today also full moon as well. When I was in a city of Aberdeen, I had a chance to see the kids are going around and asking for treat or tricks, and then I didn't know that they are coming for something, and just one off, and I thought that was just a one off, and then I gave them £5, and then the kids were like viral. So one spoke with another and then just kept coming because they got the £5 from even one house. And later I realized that you give only pennies or chocolates. So that I learned from this Halloween. Actually, this kind of ceremonies is available around the world, and this is ancient traditions. And I came to know that this type of a Halloween was once, yes, Emma, £5. Yes, I came to know that this Halloween was initially a very ancient tradition of celebration and burning and having a lights, and it was actually the Scottish one, and they used to burn to connect or just the form of reconnecting the ancestors by lighting the fire on top of the mountains. And later this tradition went to America, and because in America they have lots of pumpkins and use this pumpkin as a way of celebrating the Halloween. This is not a Christian tradition, but it is an age-old ancient tradition. Similarly, in Nepal, we have a tradition that I come across is known as I forgot the name now. It is the day that normally you would go every corners of your house and take a few soil and dusts from all the corners as a form of taking the so-called ghosts out of the house, and you take them along with the fire to the middle of the village and burn them in order to keep the safety and safe in the house, in the village. And this is quite similar, and a similar way other parts of the world also celebrates too. Now Halloween is pretty old a tradition which reconnects if we come together and reconnects the whole ancestors are possibly coming from the same root or same place. I think there is research says that we are all coming from the Africa, so possibly it is true. Okay? But nevertheless, this is just the history and presumptions. A past is a past. Okay, and this is again the a full moon, and full moon is known as one of the special days in the Buddhist calendar, and now this is a winter coming as well. So think about it, winter and a full moon. So it's like all the foxes, wolves are haunting on the move, hunting. Right? Okay, so let's go to the topic. Now, we are studying the Paticcasamuppada on the basis of the scripture, or basically original texts, what the Buddha said about. This is from the Samyutta Nikaya, and we are focusing as the Buddha explains rather than any scholars or any other people are explaining on this topic. This is from Nidana Sangyutta, and this is in this Nidana Sangyutta there are 93 discourses. Out of this 93, I think about over 70 suttas or discourses are dedicated to this Paticcasamuppada, or the dependent origination. And this dependent origination, not only in this connected discourses, only 73, but there are other parts of the scriptures you can find too. There is in long discourses or Digha Nikaya, and even in Majjhima Nikaya that you can find, and meanwhile in Anguttara Nikaya as well. So that's why this is one of the very important doctrines, and I know it is like a doctrine, a Four Noble Truth, which includes all the teachings of the Buddha. And this Paticcasamuppada, or dependent origination, also includes almost all the teachings in here too. And yesterday I was explaining up to the contact and then a sense base, which is the Salayatana, the sixth factors of the this Paticcasamuppada. And as I have said, we are starting from the aging and death rather than the ignorance, because the famous formula normally runs through the ignorance as the base, or to start to study this dependent origination, whereas in the suttas, in this particular, the second sutta of this connected discourses, it talks about the aging and death to start off. So the next was that what are the six sense bases? The eye base, the ear base, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, and these are known as the sixth sense base. Okay, and this sixth sense base again, obviously, are the main the form of that we have. And the sixth sense base, in another sense, it is known as the world as well. Because of the six senses, we conceive, or we come to contact with the world, and we perceive the world based on our six senses. Suppose we don't have six senses, then we would not be able to perceive the world as we see it now. And I gave a simile of someone who is colorblind, then they will see only the shapes, and they would not be able to recognize the colors. But as soon as if they got a new technology and put on this eyeglass, new technology, then they will be able to recognize the colors. Similarly, someone who is deaf, then they cannot hear any sounds too. So for them, it's like there is no world of a sound. So that's why the whole world that we perceive is basically on the basis of the six senses. And because of the six senses, that we create new forms and we come to the new world, and because of these things, six senses, again we end the whole world. Yeah? So these six senses are the very important base that we come to contact with the world as we see now. And the whole meanwhile, if we able to understand these six senses, then again everything turns to good, everything turns to wonderful. There won't be any crisis, there won't be any conflicts with one another, because all six senses that we have is again impermanent, and everything that it comes to contact or perceive things are also impermanent. With that concept of impermanence, then we would not be creating that the difference between one another. Okay? So the sixth sense is known as really the base to contact with the world and ourselves. And what bhikkhus is a name and form. So the further on, the next factor is a name and form, or known as a nama and rupa. And here, nama and rupa is feeling, perception, volition, contact, attention. This is known as nama, or the name. The four great elements and the form derived from the four great elements, this is known as the form. Okay? So feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention, this is called nama. Feeling, obviously, when the six senses comes to contact with the six objects, six sense-based objects, then that produces the feelings. And that feeling is again a neutral. As soon as this feeling arises, then we put the perception or a sanya, identification of that feeling or that contact. And with that perception on these objects, we define it into color and shapes and the names and what it is. And that's again is still happening inside the mind. Okay, and then on the basis of that, one would react or act something else. And that is again, you're acting with your intention. Okay, and with that intention that you are acting, and that action again, you are not acting without understanding. You have a full attention to it as well. And basically, when we look at it in the five aggregates or the panchakhanda, which is the Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, which is the main factors that is created our human life. And within these five aggregates, the feeling, perception, volitional action, and consciousness, known as the nama or the mind. Okay, or the mind. And this is the nama. And this rupa, the form, okay, this form is again made out of four elements, and which is the earth, water, fire, and wind. And these four elements made this physical body. And as a result of that, this physical body is no different to any other material things. It's one molecule, one piece of meat, or a piece of a combination of these five elements, four elements that makes this form. Similarly, other things are also made out of four elements. Only difference is which one is greater than another. Suppose water, it has a water element maximum compared to the earth element, and still earth element is visible as a water, so we can see it. Earth element comes to the second. A wind element, because of the wind, it flows, so we can see the wind element in there. The heat, that's why the water can be a cold and a hot. Same with our body too. Our body has got this earth element as the maximum, and the rest of others are the different elements which comes together. Yeah? Some would say there is a water element as a second factor in us, and the third is the heat, and the fourth is the wind. And because of the heat element that we have, it digests and it keeps us alive and keeps us warm, and it adjusts according to the weather. And this is why we are also part of the nature, and that is why again we become sick when there is a weather change. And despite of how well you looked after yourself, and sometimes it just hits the outside environment of this four element simply affects our life, and that's how we become sick. It's like a condensation inside the house. It happens like that. It's automatically affecting our life because of these four elements, which is equal to all other material things. Once we have understood in this way, what happens is that we will see everything is common and everything's are same, no difference at all. Okay? And this is a nama and a rupa. So we are made out of this nama and a rupa, and nothing more than that. Nama and a rupa is basically mind and a matter. When we talk about a mind and a body, then much easier to understand. Basically, our body doesn't feel. It is just a material things that made out of the four elements. So the four elements. Whereas the mind again are made out of four other elements, but that's more of a consciousness. Consciousness, the formation, the perception, and the feeling. So these are the mind section. Okay, so these two combination we made of. Again, this body, we have no control over it at all because of this nature. It will grow as we put anything or whatever we eat, we become. So that's simply because of the effect of four elements. Okay, so that is the nama and a rupa in the Paticcasamuppada. And then further, the Buddha said that, and what is consciousness, bhikkhus? Yeah, so there are these 6 classes of consciousness: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. This is called consciousness. Now, consciousness is very tricky word and can be very misleading in many forms. Consciousness, in another way, also known as the mind. Okay? And the consciousness, according to the Buddha's teachings, again, is not the permanent entity. It's not the permanent object that will remain, whether it's a pure form or unpure form. It is conditioned, and this conditioned consciousness will not as a permanent. So that's why there is no atta, or the permanent self, because the consciousness that normally takes to rebirth, another form, another way, another realms, is again conditioned by the actions that we are taking. And that's why that's why there are not a single consciousness, but combination of so many consciousness. When I sees an object, that moment the I consciousness arises. Then without the I consciousness, we would not be seeing anything. Suppose you are you are on the bus, and you are thinking about something, which is you're deeply concentrating on that. At that moment, your friend will be, suppose your friend is outside of the bus and he sees you, and he shouts and he waves, but your consciousness is there. Although you are looking outside of the bus, but you do not see her or him, because your consciousness is somewhere else. Your eye consciousness is not there. So that's why, I have heard that people are complaining that they saw their friend or their relatives, and they try to communicate, and yet they ignored, and which is very common, and saying that they ignored. Why? What have I done wrong? Or what I didn't do right, like that. But in fact, sometimes it could happen that your eye consciousness were there when you see that person, but on the other hand, that person's consciousness or that person is not conscious about what he or she is doing at that moment. She probably thinking about something else. She probably focusing on something else. The consciousness at that time is not there, and as a result, that person doesn't recognize you. So this happens a lot. Even doesn't matter how hard how loud you shout. If that person's consciousness is not there to listen, then they won't hear at all. And this you can imagine of, suppose you are sitting in a cafe and then there are so many other talks going on, and yet why don't you hear others talk? And that's because you have your own agenda. Your consciousness is with your friend who is at front of you, and you are focusing your friend's conversation. And you may realize that sometimes you do not unintentionally you hear someone's discussion just over the table, over another place. And that's simply because your consciousness to hear your friend's discussion is not there anymore. You are conscious about someone else talking. So this is how it happens. The consciousness of hearing, ear consciousness arises here. And similarly, other consciousness like nose consciousness, ear consciousness, and tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness are like that too. And another example I can give you, that's a body consciousness. Suppose you hit yourself, doesn't feel any hurt. You may sometimes realize that you hit. Other times you won't. At the same time, if your good friend hits you back, hits on your back, and you realize that, that's your good friend, your consciousness is there. And that leads to the good feeling. But on the other hand, if someone who you didn't like, or someone who you have animosity, and if he accidentally touches your back, what happens? And that's simply because of the consciousness you have. It's called a photapa consciousness. Then you have this perception that immediately you realize that that contact, rather than simply thinking that is a contact, you exaggerate further, saying that was a deliberately touching you, and with that you're elaborating, proliferating, and causes more trouble. More trouble. And this is why we need to be very conscious about. And furthermore, very terrible one is the mind conscious, which can make stories out of nothing, which can make stories of so much from nowhere. And then if there is any cause for that, then it's very happy to create even more and more stories. And that is, again, the main root cause of stress, anxiety, depression, and even what's called the suicidal state of the mind, and that's all simply you are simply having a thinking too much on the basis of something, and that's also known as mind consciousness. Okay, and that mind consciousness doesn't again arises alone. It comes along with the other elements that is inside our mind. And in a practice of a meditation, when you are practicing, all other five senses are closed, and as a result, other five senses consciousness are shut down, but the mind consciousness begins to more sharpen, and you will be able to realize that how much we talk inside our brains, inside our it's called a chatterbox. We talk a lot, and an ability to understand and aware of that chatting box again, that leads to mentally disturbed. So the practice of a meditation, we will be able to recognize those and ability to let it be, and this consciousness again gradually becomes sharpened. Okay? So that's why in the Buddhist term, consciousness is not just a single consciousness as it is presented in the Western philosophy, but this is again conditioned, aroused. And the practice of the more you practice, you will understand that these consciousness just drops one after another, and end of the day, these are conditioned arises. A condition arises consciousness. Once the conditions are gone, then there won't be any consciousness at all. Okay, so this is a nama, rupa, and a consciousness. Okay, so we end here for tonight on the consciousness, and we will come back to discuss about two further factors of the Paticcasamuppada. And after that, again, I will try to go on along with these discourses, just to read and just get some insight out of it. But again, meanwhile, if you have any questions on any topics or any meditations, then you are most welcome to question, and you can text me, and then I will cover them along the way as I give the talks. So with this, may you all be well and happy. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow at the same time. Again, all the talks are available on our YouTube channel, Varapunya Buddhist Meditation Society, Meditation Center, and you can link up and listen all those. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow again. In a few moments' time, we're going to have chanting and guided meditation. You are most welcome to join with us. So until then, good night, and see you shortly. May the Buddha Dhamma Sangha bless you. Sadhu.